When I first started playing Magic again during the Avacyn block, I was taught that around 40% of a draft deck should be lands, with adjustments made for factors like average mana cost, number of colors in the deck, and deck strategy. Other than when playing Legacy or Vintage, I've found that this works pretty well across all formats. In EDH, I've applied the 40% rule by starting with 39 lands in the 99, and then tweaking the count based on various reasons. While many articles and videos online make a strong case for 39 as a good average, it's important to remember that averages represent just one part of the equation. There's always a distribution of statistics to consider, and so the right average for you might not be the right average for me, because of things like how we build our decks, how we play our decks, and when we choose to mulligan, all affect how many lands we should run. As such, instead of trying to convince you 39 is a sacred number that you must adhere to, I want to discuss the reasons I increase or decrease the land count in my decks. Then you can be free to use your own baseline number, such as 36 or 41, but then use the logic I provide to increase or decrease your land counts accordingly. Now, the reason I change the number of lands I run are as follows: average mana cost, commander mana cost, card advantage, number of colors in the deck, overall deck strategies, and how competitive the games are. Let's go through these one by one. Average mana cost. If you run higher mana cost cards, you should typically be running more lands. One exception is if you run a commander which cheats things into play, such as Kalia, in which case you can treat the average mana cost of the cards you intend to play for free as 0. However, if you're not cheating high CMC cards into play, I would say a good rule of thumb is that for every average mana value past 2, you should run 1 additional land. So for example, if your average mana value without lands is 3, add 1 land to get to 40. If your average mana value without lands is 4, then add 2 lands to get to 41. Commander mana cost. If your commander is more than 4 mana, add at least 1 land for every 2 extra mana your commander costs. So for example, with Sign of the Ur-Dragon or Gestalt Sun's Avatar, I'm going to immediately add 2 lands to be at 41. This is an additive effect, so if the overall mana value of the deck is above 4, then I'm going up to 43 lands. Card advantage. If your card advantage can reliably get cards into your hand, then you can remove lands. For example, you can choose to remove a land for cards like Kadama's Reach, Cultivate, Archaeomancer's Map, and Land Tax. This is because these are lower cost spells which put lands into your hand, and therefore basically act as if you have an extra land in your deck. If you run low cost card draw, such as Brainstorm or Faithless Looting, you can also typically have these replace lands. However, if your card advantage has a high mana cost, for example, you mostly run these big mana 6 draw spells, you shouldn't remove any lands unless you have some way to reliably get to 6 mana to cast those spells. That being said, I still personally wouldn't cut lands in that situation, because that big card draw will also draw you so many cards you don't have to worry about getting mana flooded. In other words, there's not much benefit to having a lower land count when you cast those big draw spells, but there is a big increase in the risk that you might not be able to cast those draw spells in the first place. Another thing worth mentioning is having card draw in the command zone. For example, if you have a low mana cost commander like Rona, Herald of Invasion, I would probably immediately take out 5 or 6 lands and go down to 33 or 34, solely because you know you will reliably be drawing an extra card per turn once you get the commander down. Number of colors in your deck. Unless you have access to an expensive land base because you're a cringe weirdo tech bro like myself who's been buying expensive Magic cards for a long time, you'll probably want to increase your land count so you have more color fixing options. This is especially true if your commander has a lot of colored mana pips. So for example, with a 5 color commander like Joda, you'll likely want to add 1 or 2 lands to make sure you have the color fixing you need to cast him, as well as all the other spells you have in your deck. If you have 10 fetches plus 10 shocks or duels, as well as all the triomes, you can possibly ignore that advice, though it still depends on how many colored pips there are in the deck total, as well as in the commander itself. For example, if you make a Progenitus EDH deck like I've done in the past, you'll probably still want to run extra lands, even if your mana base costs more than the per capita GDP of most countries. How competitive the games are. For more competitive games, I will decrease my land count, meaning if my only concern is just winning, then I reduce my land count slightly to ensure I don't get mana flooded. Think of it this way: when I play competitive 60 card Magic on Arena, I'm just trying to win around 51% of the games I play so I can move up in rank. As such, if I get mana screwed 1 extra game out of 100 due to a lower land count, it's okay as long as that lower land count means I also win extra games. In EDH, however, I'm not trying to win 51% of the games and climb some invisible ladder. I'm just trying to hang out with my friends and play a few games. And whether I win or lose, what matters most to me is that I get to participate. And so I'd rather risk a game where I get mana flooded but at least get to cast what's ever in my hand versus a game where I get mana screwed and don't even get to play my commander. Overall deck strategy. Your deck strategy can also affect how many lands you run. Normally, this is a simple divide between more aggro and more control strategies, with aggro running less lands and control running more. However, there are more complex factors as well. For example, my Azusa Forest tribal deck runs 50 lands, but that's because the entire deck is built around having that many lands in it. As such, I run a lot of cards which take advantage of the high land count, and the deck is meant to be played in such a way that it always has 5 lands in play by turn 3. On the other extreme, my EDH deck only runs 29 lands, because I'm trying to combo out by turn 3 or 4, and so I don't really care about having enough lands in the deck to reliably play a land every turn for 5 or more turns. Most of my decks are also well designed for grindier EDH games. Running lands like the Triomes, which can be cycled to draw a card, or Path of Ancestry, which can help you scry through your deck, reduce the odds you'll end up getting mana flooded in the late game. I can't tell you how many times I've had a late game top deck where I draw a land only to cycle it into a card which ends up securing me the win. Now, let's go through some of my decks and show how I apply these guidelines. My Giada Waifu Angel Tribal deck runs 38 lands. Because the average mana value without lands is over 4, I would add 2 lands to get me to 41. However, I also run Archaeomancer's Map, Land Tax, and Expedition Map, all of which are low mana value cards which put lands into my hand. Therefore, each of these cards replace a land, and I go down to 38. Also, because it's monocolored, I run these lands which draw me cards, so I don't have to worry as much about getting mana flooded. This is a point I want to highlight. You can run lands that do things other than just tap for mana. Not just MFDC lands or the Kamigawa Channel lands, but cycle lands, scry lands, maze effects, token generators. Lands don't just have to be these boring things which exist solely to help you cast your spells. Now, some people might look at a commander like Giada who has a tap ability and think they can and should run less lands because she herself is a mana rock. However, in Battlecruiser EDH, you typically don't want to run a mana rock in place of a land because you typically don't want to play a mana rock instead of a land. Rather, you want to play a mana rock or some other ramp as well as a land. The same is true for something like Nature's Lore. I don't want to play Nature's Lore instead of making a land drop. I want to do both. That's how you get ahead on mana. A deck which runs more lands than 39 is K&T, which runs 43. This is because with K&T's ability, I'm trying to put an extra land into play each turn, which means I want more lands in my hand reliably. Also, K&T is a control deck, and oftentimes control decks need more mana than other deck types. Lastly, K&T themselves require 4 different colored mana pips, and having more complex casting costs typically means you want more lands. With a deck like this, I'd actually probably normally want to go as high as 45 or even 46 lands. However, I run cards like Kadama's Reach and Cultivate, and I also run the bounce lands, which help me increase my land drops because they return lands to my hand, which I then later put back into play using K&T's ability. Because of that, I go down to 43 lands. For my Yoshimaru Kadama deck, I run 38 lands. The average mana value of the deck without lands is a little over 3, so I add 1 land to get to 40. However, I have both Cultivate and Kadama's Reach, which take me down to 38. But on the other hand, this deck wants to ramp pretty hard into Kadama, which is 6 mana, or various big mana draw spells. Because of that, I might normally choose to go up to 39 lands. However, because I have partner commanders, I have 98 cards instead of 99 cards in the main part of the deck. As such, based on experiments I've run, I found that 38 feels like the right amount for this deck. This brings up a final point I want to make. At best, this is a guide for helping you develop a reasonable hypothesis, which you can use to run experiments and determine if your deck runs enough lands. When it comes to fine-tuning your mana base, there are plenty of ways to experiment. The best method is simply to play more games and observe how your deck functions. But because no one wants to show up to an EDH night with a deck that can't function, you can start by goldfishing or using various statistical tools. For instance, I like this app on AetherHub because it helps calculate how reliably you'll draw into the lands you need. Tools like this have reinforced my belief that 39 lands is a solid baseline for most decks, because I think most decks want to start the game with at least 3 lands in hand, and 39 lands lands in the 99 gives you a 57% chance of having at least 3 lands when you draw 7 cards. That being said, stats are only part of the story. Goldfishing could give you an even better idea of how your deck will actually function. Just remember, goldfish with integrity. Mulligan like you would in a real game. Don't just redraw until you hit the perfect opening hand with Soul Ring and Cultivate and some threat you want to ramp into, and then tell yourself, wow, this deck is flawless. No, you need to mulligan honestly. If you mulligan honestly while goldfishing and you get 4 bad hands in a row, take that as a red flag. It's better to discover these issues in testing than to spend a game or 2 of EDH with an unplayable hand. After all, if you're only playing 3 games in a night, do you really want to risk spending 2 of them staring at an empty board?